All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Flavie Younger. I am with Frasch. I am one of the co-founders of Frasch. If you have not heard of us before, we are a acoustical company. We do what we like to call aesthetical acoustics, sort of, if you will. We try to always help you guys sort of sneak in the sound absorptive material so it looks like part of the design intent, not something that has to go in there that you did not want it to go in there to begin with. So because of all what we spend our time doing, it did make sense for us to spend a little bit of time to talk a little bit about NRC ratings, right? Noise reduction coefficient and what that really means, because so much of this acoustical language can be quite confusing. One thing about this class is I am not an acoustician, so I am actually going to specifically deliver this class in a way that hopefully we all can understand, right? So we can wrap our mind around it, that it's not just science, right, and physics and all that stuff. So let's jump right in. So first, let's address a few common acoustical measurements, or I should say acoustical terms, right? So what is NRC? And NRC stands for noise reduction coefficient. Every material has one. What it is a rating from 0 to 1, 0 being perfect reflection, and then 1 being perfect absorption. And we'll go more into what all of that means in a little bit. What are Sabins? So Sabin is what helps you decide, because if something just has a high NRC, what the other second thing that matters is how much of it you have in a space and its performance, right? So what essentially Sabins does, it takes the material NRC and times it times the square footage of the material you have, and that will give you the Sabin number. What's reverberation time? Reverberation time is really talks about the amount of time the sound wave gets to hang out in a space before it dies off completely from the original noise, right? From the direct sound made. So those are those. And here's a few more, and then we'll do true NRC discussion. Transmission. You hear this a lot as well. So what is transmission? You're talking about passage of sound through a wall or from the street into the building, right? The amount of energy that transmits through a hard substrate. That's kind of what we're talking about. What is diffusion? Diffusion is actually a beautiful, very important tool we have in acoustics, which is essentially, you can think of it as geometry, right? Adding, taking flat surfaces into something that has some geometry will definitely smooth out the sound and make it less, make it more attractive, if you will. What is reflection? So we kind of touched on it earlier. So reflection is the amount of sound waves that reflect from a hard surface and bounce back into the space. So imagine as a hard surface, think glass, right? So when we talk about reflection, we're talking about a sound wave hits the hard surface and bounces back into the space, right? Absorption is the exact opposite of reflection. We are talking about the amount of sound energy, sound waves that gets absorbed by a material. In this instance, a good thing to think about is think of something highly poofy, porous, a lot of air cavities, a lot of little nooks and crannies where sound waves can be trapped and have trouble traveling into the space after it, okay? All right, so what is NRC rating? So a little more into what that means, right? So NRC rating is really a way to help us figure out how much sound absorption you can expect for materials to reflect back and how much of it they will absorb. 0 really essentially means 0, and 1 means 100. So when we say something has an NRC of 100, what we're saying is that 100% of the sound that reached that material got absorbed, right? So that's really what the scale is, right? Every material has one. The examples of some of the materials that we use in the buildings and their NRCs, you can see that right here. A lot of the stuff we use is it's hard surface, right? It has very little, it has very few pores, therefore it has very good reflection of the sound. It doesn't absorb sound very well, and that would be something like brick, concrete, glass. All of those are 0.01, which means of every sound waves that reaches that surface, 10% of it will be absorbed, but 90% of it will be sent or bounced back into the space, right? And as you go down the field, as you get closer to more air in the material, the more the sound absorption goes up. We at Frasch work with a material called PET. It's also called acoustical felt. I think designers renamed it as such just because it's probably a little sexier than PET. What's PET? It's usually, you see it everywhere. It's really plastic. It's recycled plastic. In our instance, we actually use recycled water bottles to create it, but what makes it highly sound absorbent is the process, how it's put together, right? So particular with this, we take we will take used plastic that gets crushed, then it gets turned into threads, and the threads then are laid on top of each other in the opposite direction. So that's kind of where it gets the felt feeling, and also that's what's a felting process, right? And as you lay the threads on top of each other, interlocking each other, at the end, you put a little heat, because we're still dealing with plastic, right? You put a little heat onto it, and it allows you to create a board, if you will, right? However, we preserved all those little air pockets in the material, and that's actually what makes it so highly sound absorbent. Okay, so the basics of acoustics, right? So one designer told me, or maybe it was an architect a long time ago, and it kind of stayed with me. He said, he was like, sound is the last thing you think about, but it's the first thing you notice. And I think that is so true. We've all had the experience where you're about to walk into a building, like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. You can't wait to be inside, right? Because it's just this open space and it just looks so amazing. And then the moment you walk in, you just get bombarded by all these unpleasant sounds. Why is that? So that is when the intent of the place doesn't match the soundscape that ended up being created, right? So as we mentioned, reflection, reverberation, and echo is sort of the troublemakers, right? So if it's a very open space, meaning we have open space where we have a lot of hard surfaces, that means just what we mentioned earlier is there are thousands of points to which every sound gets to bounce off of. And if everything that the place is made out of fits on that scale of what we were talking of NRC closer to 0.01, then very little of the sound gets absorbed, right? So you get that really just a long-lasting reverberation that can be quite headache producing, if you will. So what sound absorption? So what you can do is take some of the space and cover it with materials that have high NRC, right? High noise reduction coefficient, or think of it as highly porous product. So when a sound wave hits that material, it gets stuck in there. Essentially, that's how you can kind of think about it, right? It gets stuck in it, and can keep bouncing throughout the place. Therefore, there's less of the reverberation and less of the sound waves traveling in a space. The last picture that I added in here is sound blocking, because it's important, because that often ends up getting confused with what we were talking about. So sound blocker is different than sound absorber, right? Sound blocker actually is something that sound cannot penetrate through. Think of like a vinyl, right? So it serves very different purposes. It's not intended, what it does, it's a great place to keep sound moving from one room to the other. However, if you want the echo and reverberation to go down, sound blocker is not going to help with that. All right, so now we get, I love this thing, kind of lets me figure out what you guys are thinking. So let me make sure I know how to operate this thing. Okay, so how often are you asked, let me turn this on, launched. So how often are you asked acoustical question or asked to assist with correcting acoustical issues? So I turn on this poll. I'm super curious to see what you guys answer. I'm just intrigued to see how much you actually get involved in this, because sometimes our perception seems like all the time, but that's partly because we work in it and we live in it. We have conversations about, hey, we built this beautiful office, but customer hates everything about it because sound travels from one conference room to the other, no one can focus, blah blah blah, all that stuff, right? Perfect. Okay, so let's give it a couple more seconds. A lot of you guys have voted already. There's a few of you that haven't, so let's give it another sec, and then let's close it. All right. Okay, so what happened? I did click something wrong. Sorry, guys. Share. Okay, so it looks like 13% of you guys said all the time, and 40% of you said sometimes, and 30% said once in a while. So pretty large numbers. It sounds like you guys get involved in it. Here's the thing, it's just kind of what we said before, right? Everything can go right, but if this place doesn't sound like it's supposed to, it is a fail, right? And we know, because we all probably can name a few restaurants where we would love to go, but we don't go just because it's just not a place where we can even hear ourselves think, right? Okay, so let's get to the next set of information. How do we get this NRC testing, right? So the way NRC is measured is there are specific labs that do this. There is like a chamber, reverberation chamber, if you will. So what essentially is done is you have a sorry about this. Close this. Okay, the technicians know what is the reverberation time of the chamber with nothing in it, right? So then you add the material or the finished product into the chamber, and it calculates the reverberation time once the product was added into it, right? So that's in general how this works. Oh, by the way, guys, if you have any questions, you can type those in. I will answer those at the end. I have my trusty Laura with me, so she usually helps me manage all that and get that going. So if you have anything, you can send it in there. So that kind of makes sense, right? Lots of physics, lots of science, blah blah blah. Put it in this. Lots of smart people tell you, hey, here's the NRC of your product, of your material. Okay, but let me pull back a curtain and kind of let you guys know that not all NRCs are created equal, right? You will see the NRC rating being posted on all materials, right? It's this, it's all that. However, here's a very important thing, is what you do with the material after dramatically changes its performance of what it was rated. So let's pick on the material that I know that we work with, which is the PET. So most PETs, or at least the one we work with, it's a 9mm thick PET. It has an NRC of 0.75, right? So yeah, impressive, right? Little 9mm thick thing, it will absorb 75% of sound, which beautiful, right? However, it depends what you do with it, right? So if you take the raw material, or really any of our materials, and you decide, okay, we're going to glue this directly to a wall, here's what happens. The NRC rating will go down to as far as 0.30, right? So we cut it by more than a half. And why is that? Well, for the best performance, you need air, right? If the material is surrounded by air, the entire material, all sides, really get to perform, right? So that's kind of what happens there. So the next photo you see, what happens? Oh, by the way, all of this is recreated in the chamber. So we're actually using floor as the hard surface. It kind of works exactly the same as if you glued it to the wall, and just usually would not glue this to the floor. So if you're using, so I'm using is really a substitute for the floor to speak correctly. So what happens if you add a 2-inch gap? With 2-inch gap, you increase your NRC to 0.55. 4-inch gap gets you NRC back to 0.65. But if you take this material and turn it into what we could call a baffle, right? It's a suspended application in a ceiling, bam, you're back to 0.75. So when you see an NRC of a material, you know, of any kind of material, if it's, you know, if it's not clarified to what it's talking about, it is most likely been measured with in the center of a chamber, perfectly surrounded by sound. So why is that? So what can you do for walls, right? Because we've kind of picked on walls and how that whole thing works. Here's an example. So to kind of illustrate clearly to what we mean. So when a sound reaches the raw material, like you see in the drawing on the left, some of the sound waves do get absorbed, as we saw in the ratings. However, the sound waves actually get a chance. Some of the sound waves will reach the hard substrate behind the material, and we'll get a lovely bounce back into the space, right? So if you look at the right photo, so what happens when you add air cavity, right? The same process. Sound waves hits the material, goes through the material, ends up in the air cavity, and then it has to work again to get back into the space. And as you saw in the previous slide, the larger the air cavity, the better the performance. The best performance, suspended application. I'm not saying that we should not be using walls or something like that. It's just, it's really important to be aware to how the difference between maybe what the NRC of the material itself is versus the actual application once installed. So here's a product design and how you can improve performance, right? So we just say, oh, if you glue this stuff to the wall, you just need to know the NRC is lower, right? However, look at these lovely options. So these are our 3 products where we really took advantage of something I've touched on before, which is diffusion or geometry. And also we worked around creating the air pockets, right? The air cavity that you need for the best performance. So let's look at the Cliff and Polly, right? The right and center photo. What do you have here? So why is the NRC 0.7, 0.95? You guys see this, right? So it's actually higher than what the material rated. It's several reasons. Number one, because of the folding, you're fitting more square feet of the material on a smaller on a smaller footprint. The geometry of the material gives you the diffusion, right? And they are hollow, which means there is a huge air pocket for the sound to get trapped, right? So brick, you're like, why did you include brick 2.0? It's only 0.5, it's not impressive at all. Well, hang on, guys. Remember, direct glued PET to a wall only gives you 0.3, 0.35. And guys, this is not specific to Frasch. This is specific to all PET. I promise you. This is, you know, the physics is physics, right? So what actually the way we got to 0.5 with brick 2.0 is by folding the edges, right, and creating automatic air cavities. So you could still install these pieces really just like you would install a picture, right? Super easy, couple nails. It actually gets installed from the front, which is really awesome. If you guys want more info on that, I can certainly provide that some other time. But we're dealing with something that looks like a flat surface thing, but instead of having 0.3 NRC, we have 0.5, right? So now let's go quickly to ceilings, right? Again, the same thing. We're taking advantage of putting as much material in small spaces, creating geometry, diffusion, right? Breaking out right angles. It will very much help with this. Some of these, as you see in NRC now, I'll put those in here so I get you guys thinking like, what is this? 1.3, 1.9 NRC? That can't be. The thing only goes to 1. 1 is 100. How can you have more than 100 NRC? Well, guess what? No, you can't, right? So when you guys see this kind of ratings, know this. The reason we end up with these kind of ratings, one is because we've done such a good job at putting so much material and the air cavity and the shapes, blah, blah, blah. But it really has more to do with the limitation of testing. So when you put this material in the chamber, it kind of assumes that it's a flat material. It struggles with making 3-dimensional objects, right? It doesn't account for that. So we do still post whatever measurements we got because we allowed to we allowed the acousticians decide what they want to do with it. I've heard acousticians say they just round it all down to 1 to do their math, and then I've heard some they're like, well, we like to actually cut it in half and actually think of it as 2 baffles instead of 1. So that's past my knowledge base, but just keep in mind when you see things when go over 1, it probably has all to do with the fact that it's a 3-dimensional item, and it probably has a very, very good sound absorption, but it didn't change how physics work and can absorb more than 100%, right? Okay, so that's the testing. So let's now look really quickly at a little more on reverberation time. I have addressed some of it, right? Very important thing. There's no such a thing as a good reverberation and bad reverberation. There's an appropriate reverberation to what you're doing. How can you tell what that is? The long reverberation, let's just say this. The long reverberation is for music. It gives you that goosebumpy feeling, right? It's really great for that. However, if the goal is to have clarity of speech, you want the reverberation to be as short as possible. And if you look at the photo that I included here, here's kind of why that is. This is why when you have reverb and echo, it's hard to understand people, because when I'm talking, that's considered direct sound, right? But there are thousands of points around me where my voice will reach, right? And if you're listening to me and if you're in a really echoey room, what happens with the reflective points that you see, the green little lines, because those are the things that bounced off the walls, they reach your ear just a tiny bit later than the direct sound. So you kind of hear me, you hear me again, you hear me again, you hear me again, but I keep talking, right? And that's kind of what creates that muddled sound and lack of clarity of speech. Okay, scary formula, don't worry about it. We will just touch on this. So this is how you figure out reverberation time. We actually use RT60 reverberation time, which is essentially how long does it take for sound pressure or the sound waves to decrease by 60 decibels. We do that by 0.49 is static. That doesn't change. Don't worry about it. There's only a different number if you use metric instead of I don't know what our thing calls. Sorry, I didn't grow up here. I still don't actually know inches and and feet. Excuse me. Anyway, so the way you figure out, you need to know the volume of the space, right, which is the length, width, and height of the room. Then you need the surface area. When we talk about surface area, we talk about the flat surfaces, which is all of your walls, ceiling, and floor, right? As we talked about, sound waves love flat surfaces. They love bounce off of it. Those are your troublemakers. So that's kind of what you want to do. But the reason why I threw that in here is if you're dealing with acoustics, the only thing that you probably can change in your design is probably the materials you choose from. Because if we assume the walls are where they are, they will be what they will be, and the only thing you can change in this formula is the funky A, which is Sabins, which we said is just a collection of the NRC and the square footage of that NRC material in a space, right? So like, okay, that's all fine and good, but I don't even know what we need, right? So if you figure out this formula, you can see where you're gonna be, and this kind of shows you sort of what we're shooting for, right? So if you are calculating this, or just you know that this is really high reverberation, it's at 1.5, 1.6. Unless you're building a church, people are not going to be happy with you, right? If it is a library, open office, a classroom, anywhere where we're sharing information and we need to clearly understand each other, you need your reverberation time to be below 1 if possible, right? And this is kind of a formula that kind of shows you that. Let me show you something really quickly when it doesn't quite go all that well.
Can we get our acoustics? Because every customer I talk to, they think I'm talking to them in a bathroom stall.
Okay, this guy, I love him. His name is John. We were literally just walking through a Lone Star Electric of one of our clients. They called us. They said we just took part of our distribution center. We changed it into offices. Of course, it's a concrete floors, 24-foot high ceiling, metal ceiling, and this is what the sales guy's offices sounded like, right? Yeah, not good. This is pretty extreme difference. You know, they had a terrible training room that we fixed and things like that. We need to get back and film the after for you guys. I don't have that ready, but you can see how acoustics can completely change. His office was lovely. You know, it was beautiful. It was private. It was all this, but that's what it sounded like, right? So let's look at some fun things when we talked about how can you really essentially sneak in acoustical material without it looking like it, right? It's sort of like, I like to think of it as this is sort of let's do a let's essentially put in some vegetables. I'm not sure why it's doing this. I did share this. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, now hide. I'm trying to ask this next question, but it's not working for me. I'm not sure why it's broken. I was gonna just ask you if you guys could identify. This one isn't working, so sorry about this. We can skip it. I was just gonna ask you for a fun question that says, can you identify how many of the products in here are acoustic? So we can play. So I'll just show you. There's baffles. They are hanging dividers. They are perforated. They have large air cavity on the inside. Then you have desk dividers. They are removable. They are also large air cavity on the inside, PET on both sides, and then you have movable room dividers, right? So a bunch of stuff. Here's another one. So how do you add the material into the space? That's part of the design, where you can really sort of play around and really change how it's going to sound. So what you see here on the wall, that's a glued on PET. I know y'all probably sounded during this presentation like, don't do that, don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. Just remember, you will need more of it, most likely, and also know what is the true number you're working with once you glue it. That's the only thing that matters. I think this is absolutely gorgeous, right? So the top lighting is a band light, which is just a tubular long lights with little it looks to me like a little roof, which I love. And then in a center, what you see is our teardrop light fixture. It's the largest one we have. So what did we do here? One thing that light fixture specifically is doing is we put it close to the source, right? This is intended to be a place for conversation. So when you sit there, what happens is the human voice travels up, you know, you have the wall behind you and then the light fixture right there, and it kind of gets trapped in there. So it doesn't have a chance to bounce all over the place, right? Here's another couple ideas right here, right? Again, similar thing. Light fixtures or really dome-like structures are really fun to put over conference rooms and conversation pieces because it kind of takes care of the bouncy places. But again, you know, aesthetics, right? Play with the color, play with the shapes, make it like, oh, we wanted this to be this way, not like, oh, we got stuck putting acoustical material here, even though we wanted an open space. So if you hated everything I've said and you're like, you won't remember any of it, if you can just remember these 3 rules of thumb, I feel like it's gonna make your life slightly easier if this topic confuses you. So first one, mind flat surfaces. If you walk in and you're like, this is terrible sounding, if you cover 15 to 30% of the flat surfaces, you will get to a desired effect in most instances. How do you figure out your flat surfaces? Do not forget about your ceiling and your floor. Those are also your flat surfaces. By the way, guys, in most instances, this number really just means cover one of the longer walls and you're good to go. Placement. Oftentimes, we don't have unlimited budgets. We also don't want to cover everything and everywhere. Think about where to put it, right? So if you have an office and there's the quiet accountants that are getting really annoyed by the loud sales folk, right? Sometimes I've seen the tendency of like surrounding the accountants with sound absorber. You don't necessarily want to do that. What you actually want to do, you want to be close to the source. Remember that. So as the loud sales guys are talking on the phone, what have you, you want to think about how do we absorb the sound before it has a chance to travel or all over the place, right? So this is sort of where we talk about placement. If you're doing something like you're working on a lot of people on the phone, you want to figure out putting a acoustical material in front of their faces, right? It will definitely change dramatically how the space works. And geometry, diffusion is your friend. Folded materials, shapes to the materials matters. If you can utilize the ceiling and have things that are suspended and hanging, that's always one of the better options. So that's it. I feel like I went a little long. This is my first time doing this class. I am long-winded. Apologies for that. I'm glad you hung out with me for the extra 7 minutes here. I greatly appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, I am happy to answer them. Let's open the question. Can you send us the slides? Of course, I can send you the slides. I'll be happy to do it. You know, you can use it however you need. We're happy to help to share that. We can do it after, no worries. Any other questions for me? There's another one, but I can't read it. I don't know.
Do we do site visits and make recommendations, Slavi?
So, guys, we're manufacturers. We're not acousticians. However, we do actually. There is rules of thumb. There's best practices, and if you have a rep in town, which we do, we can definitely have a rep to help you. We also will come and see, you know, we're in Dallas, so if you're around here, we can certainly help you. But I can tell you that most of our projects, actually what ends up happening is architects, designers send us their drawings. And as long as we know the dimensions of the space, the height of the ceiling, and what the space is going to be used for, we are very comfortable making recommendation on which products to use and their placement. So we can certainly even help you long distance. And I don't see the other ones. I see there's a bunch and I can't see them. Okay, Laura, what's the next one?
One person asked, and I answered, although you probably have a better answer, what if baffles are mounted to a wall as a vertical application?
Oh, you can certainly do that. Then you can kind of think of them more as, so it depends what you mean by baffle. So if you think of a baffle that has some width to it and it's hollow, it will perform similar to what I was showing you, that a brick or like the material with, you know, with being off the ground does for you, right? So you do have air. You have the air cavity in there. It is not going to perform the same as if it was suspended from the ceiling, because one of the surfaces of the baffle is now attached to a hard substrate, right? So that one is not available for you for the absorption. I hope that makes sense. My customer has kids center specializing in autism. Would walls or ceiling be best for stopping sound transmission to neighbors? So for sound transmission, we actually do products that has actually sound. You want sound blocker, right? Doing sound absorption does help even with the transmission, because when you absorb the sound, there's a lot of it, less of it is lingering in a space, so it does actually ends up helping with sound transfer. We actually have done plenty of offices where we, you know, put the stuff on the wall, and it does help with that. We do also do sound blocking, which is essentially a different product. It's, you know, it's vinyl. It can go on inside, and I can give you some more information on that. That's truly will block the sound from escaping that direction. But yeah, it will help some. Do you guys have a rep in New Mexico? Yes, we do. We're happy to share that info with you. Our geometric products shipped, assembled? Yes. We actually spent enormous amount of time of R&D on the shipping part, Jeff. So I love your question. It was a very exciting day once we figured it out. We have actually invested in this foam type equipment that fills in all the space for it, because some of the scariest thing really to ship is to ship is to ship air. You know, you're asking for trouble. So you either build a truly a crate, hard crate for this kind of stuff, or you do this process. So it just depends what it is. In general, our stuff, you know, you have to really baby it when it comes to shipping. So we definitely ship that already assembled. You know what does not come assembled, which is really fun, and I don't know if this was part of my presentation at all, maybe if you didn't use any of the photos. If you go to our website and go look at the series of products that we've created in partnership with 1468. 1468 is a design firm in UK, and we love their stuff. We now manufacture their stuff. We have an exclusive distribution in the United States with these guys. And check out their stuff. What they've done, all of their stuff is put together using tongue and groove process. And so it all ships flat. That's the only thing that ships flat that ends up being, you know, that has symmetry. Plus, it does not require any glue. So if you are looking for really, you know, obviously our material already, we have a declare label and red list free and reach and all that stuff, you know, the material itself. However, if you want to even make it even better for the environment, 1468 is the way to go. There's no glue, and also everything that comes from that line will ship flat, which again is much better for the environment. Who can I send a plan for product recommendation? The best email you can send it to is called quotes@frasch.co. So it's quotes@frasch.co. There's no M at the end, it's just CO. Those are all of our estimators are there, and they usually turn all the requests information within 24 hours, unless it's something super complex, but you will hear from them within 24 hours. They're really great. So A, you'll just get an idea of what you need. B, how much it will cost. Oh yes. Oh, love your questions. I've been asked that every time. I keep trying to include it, but I keep forgetting. Cleanability. This is the beautiful thing about PET. You can't hurt it, and also you can disinfect it to CDC guidelines requirements. The only difference between cleaning soft materials like PET and hard surfaces, you don't wipe, you spray. So any of the Lysols and all that, you can spray it with that. You can actually also clean it with bleach water mixture. And you literally just follow, we have instructions on cleaning and disinfecting on our website, but really any of the CDC recommended cleaning for all the different COVID agents, you can follow any of the ones for soft fabrics, and you can't hurt this. Yeah, it's really durable. You know, it's not colored, right? So it's made out of recycled plastic. So it's something that you know, you can think of as almost like a color through, because it's the threads, right? The threads have that color. So that's answer on that. Are there any others I should touch on? Are there antimicrobial options? No, they're not. We currently don't offer that. There, you know, I think there's like antimicrobial treatments we could do, but we haven't really looked at that. I think the maybe the best way to do this is doing it at the material production level, which you know, we haven't quite tackled that one. So if this has to do with hospitals and medical things, you know, we get we've been you know, in general, medical facilities don't like to try new things, which is, thank God, right? They're very you know, they don't like to take chances, which is quite smart. We have actually done quite a few projects for the waiting areas, the open spaces and things like that. You know, it's a porous material, so this idea that you can sort of take a hard brush and scrub it is just probably not the thing to put like in the, you know, where you actually help the people. Flammability, yes, it's class A. You can get Class A or Class B, depending what you need. A lot of times, you know, for walls, especially if you're just using a little bit of the surface, people like the Class B. If it's A, you know, a lot of the ceilings, you do A. And also, if you're working in some of the like schools or assisted living, obviously that's all A. So it's a matter of what you prefer. You just need to let us know. But either one is an option. I think that's it, right, Laura? Is there any other questions?
Yeah, I do think that's it. There were a couple of questions about whether or not we will be handing out the slides. Slavi, you did, it looked like you were towards the end there, your slides were not moving. We will definitely post a copy of the whole webinar on the website after the second one that we're doing next week. So you can at least, you know, pass through the end of that. And then we can also post on our specs and downloads page the PDF of the presentation.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. I had no idea that it was happening. And now when I look at the screen where it says audience page, oh my gosh, you guys, it's still stuck on many slides before.
Sorry, I should have interrupted you. I tried to send you a message.
Somehow the sharing was muted or something. I don't know. Sorry, guys. So you missed half of it. Let me back up really quick. If you guys are still hanging out and what you didn't see, at least you get to see the pretty photos I was showing. Okay, so this is where it got stuck. Here's where I showed you what is what. Here's some more pretty thingies. Wall treatment is acoustical material, so are the two sets of light fixtures. Kind of the same idea here. You know, this is the waffle baffle, this is harmony, the black and yellow harmonies are sort of the perforated pieces. You can get these with lights or without. The center is actually our soft wall, or it's a wall that has so many different applications and possibilities. This one's actually on that sort of a pivot hardware that lets you open and close it. And of course, on the right, you got some clouds. You can do clouds with lighting, and of course, space division right there. And I think that's it as far as visual ones. This is just the notes, and this is the final thing. So, okay, so you guys didn't miss that much. You didn't miss the eye candy. Apology for that. But I will definitely make sure you guys get a copy of it as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for hanging out a little longer than 30 minutes. It's always a fun thing. Please email, call us, whatever you need. We're here for you, and we look forward to working with you on your next project. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.